Hi everybody, welcome to this tutorial. Today we're going to be having a look at a few things that can go wrong with Maya and easy ways to fix those errors. So the first thing I'm going to have a look at is the freeze transformation. So let's have a look at that. First I'm going to create a couple of boxes. So when you're modeling when you're making objects, you have a hierarchy which is where you can locate under the Windows Outliner menu. So at the moment I can move this object independently and I can move this object independently. Okay, so what I can do is with any of these objects, I can create a parent-child relationship by right-clicking and dragging it onto the other objects. So now pcube1 and pcube2, you can see here's a hierarchy. You can see pcube1 is the parent of pcube2. So if I move pcube1, pcube2 will move along. However, if I move pcube2, that's just going to move relative to its parent. It's going to move relative to pcube1. Similarly, if I rotate or if I scale. Okay, so what can go wrong with these kind of relationships? For example, I can scale this. See, I've got this scaled as 1.184 on all three axes: scale X, scale Y, and scale Z. So if I scale this on, for example, just the Y axis, short, now I've scaled this entire space so that this object here is now living in a squashed space. What do I mean by that? Let's have a look. So when I try to rotate this object, this object is now becoming deformed because this entire space is squashed. So I've got that back to 0 now, which is good. So how I can get around that is using freeze transformation. So you can see here, the scale is set to a specific number. What I can do is go modify and freeze transformations, and that sets all of these transformations back to their defaults. This is 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and scale 1. And that is just, so now this object is essentially its default state. Previously, its default state was the original cube that we set out, which would have been a more cube-looking cube. Now when we rotate this, it's no longer living in this squashed space. So there's something to be aware of. If your object is distorting or if your object is not moving correctly, something to look at is freeze transformations. And that's also useful for when applying textures. If you're having some trouble with textures, freeze transformations. The second thing I want to have a look at is the delete history. So when we make our object, we have a whole range of nodes. So I've looked at the attribute editor. I've got this node that has the transform attributes. I've got a node that has a lot of the mesh and display attributes. I've got a node that has, this is the, oh, sorry, I don't even know what this node is, to be honest. I've got this node here for the actual cube attribute, so how many subdivisions it has, how many, the width, the height, the depth, things like caps. Then we have the shader, which I was mixing up with this one before. So we have the shader, which has the material, which is a Lambert, and we can adjust things like the color and whatnot. So we have all of these attributes to make up our object. As we edit our object, that's going to create more and more of these nodes. So for example, if I create a insert edge loop, that's going to create another attribute. And so I can see here, poly split ring. So I've made this poly split ring, and I've got all of these attributes for that. Once again, I'm going to create another one, and you can see it's making all of these nodes. So that means that I'm able to undo a lot of these actions. It also means that it's going to get very, very memory heavy and bog down. So once I've done with modeling something, so if I've sort of reached a state of modeling though, I'm ready to move on to the next step. What we can do is delete this history. So let's have another better look at this visualization. So if I go here into Windows and General Editors and Hypergraph Connections, it shows all of these different things that go up to make our object. So that's that poly split ring that we just looked at, the other one. We can just move this around like any other window. Our cube, our geometry, and it doesn't actually show our shading in detail, but it shows that we've got quite a few nodes. So the more I model with this, the more this is going to, the more detail this is going to show. So for example, if I make a extrude, Control E, that's made a new node here, poly extrude. So we can get very detailed, and this can bog down our memory. So once we're happy with how our modeling is looking, we can then simplify that by using edit and delete history. So delete by type and history. And keep in mind that that means that we're losing some of the nodes as to how our object was made. So we only want to do this when we reach a point where we're happy to move on to another section. So for example, we might have modeled, we might have just done our box modeling, or we might have just finished a component. Now we want to add smoothing. So this is a good point that we can do, is delete our history, and that way that we're working with a much simpler object. And you can see there's only two nodes here and 3 here. We don't need to worry about that too much. That's just because we can see our shader in more detail within our attribute editor. Okay, so a very simple thing to do: edit, delete by type, and history. So we now have 2 ways of dealing with objects that are going a little bit crazy, which can happen from time to time. Okay, the third thing I want to have a look at is the plugin manager. Now the plugin manager can cause us trouble if there's plugins that aren't working or not supported, or maybe they're taking up too much memory, or if there's just plugins that we don't have. So some plugins can tend to fall off, and I think that's to do with Maya's management of resources. So let's have a look at this. I go into Window, plugin settings, preferences, and then plugin manager. You can see I've got a lot of these plugins are unloaded. A lot of these are for things that are more complex than what we're looking at doing. So we have a classic one to look at is, I've got MASH loaded here, but for example, MTOA is our Arnold plugin. So this is the plugin for our Arnold renderer. So if I, for example, if I've forgotten to put this plugin, when I go to render, I'm not going to have the option of rendering with Arnold. So we want to make sure that I have that plugin loaded. Similarly, in our classroom that we've seen before, I have this. We've had actual errors with this thing called XGen. So sometimes it might pay to turn plugins off, or plugins that we don't need. So for example, I know, I'm not going to be using Maya Fur, which is hidden on me at the moment. For example, Maya Turtle, for example. So I make sure that's turned off. So it's a good idea to have a look at what plugins are turned on or turned off if you're having trouble doing something, or if you're having an error. One quick way to get all of these back is click Apply to All, and this auto load here is to load them as you load up Maya, so they'll load up each time. See how this is starting to slow my computer down? And that's the thing, the more plugins you have activated, the more resources that you're going to be using. So just be aware of that. If you're having, if your computer's running a little bit slow, it might not pay to have all of these plugins turned on. So for example, we're not going to be using Bullet. We're not going to be using, here we go, there it is, Fur. We're not going to be using that one. So I can very safely turn that off because I don't need that specific plugin. Okay, cool. The last thing I'm going to have a look in as is the layout. So we've seen over here that we can change our layout to Maya Classic, modeling, which gives you slightly different tools, sculpting, and a whole range of other ones that we can look at later down the track. But if your UI has gone a little bit haywire and you're not sure how to get it back, what we can do is go to Windows and Workspaces, and right down here we can see we can reset Maya Classic, or the current workspace, to a factory default. So that means that if you've lost a window, if you've lost a button, or you've changed the UI around a little bit, we can reset that, and now we're back to the UI that we know from history. Okay, so that concludes this tutorial. A few things that we can do to fix a problem. So the first one was modify freeze transformations. The second one was edit, delete by type history. The third one was Windows and settings preferences plugin manager. And the fourth one was in the same menu, Windows, Workspaces, and we can change Workspaces or reset our, well, I can't reset it now because it is reset, or we can reset our workspace. All right, that concludes this tutorial. Thank you very much.